DC and the Neil Haley Show, and we're with our host, Sarah Chazinski. Sarah, this is exciting to work with you, getting these community matters discussed in New Hampshire. Thanks for coming by, and I'm looking forward to our guest today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Neil. It's wonderful to be here, and it's really important for me as a community member to make sure that the voices of our community members are heard and that we're talking about issues that actually matter here on the ground in New Hampshire. And we have an amazing guest with us today, someone who quite literally brought me to tears the first time I heard her speak. She has been inspiring. She has been in my heart through this whole process. She's an incredible community leader. Grace Kandecki, she is the director of projects for New Hampshire Center for Justice and Equity, as well as a board member for BLM. She's not only an artist, but she's also an immigrant rights activist, a racial justice advocate, and she was born in the Democratic Republic of Congo and raised here in New Hampshire. She is just a powerhouse. And Grace, we're so happy to have you on. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure, and it's great to meet you, Neil, and so good
Great
to
to
talk
meet
with you,
you.
Sarah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously it's been a pretty intense last week. I know you and I have seen each other out in the community quite a bit over the last week. I'd love to hear from you, Grace. You can share some of your background, but feel free to dive right into what you're hearing on the ground, how you're seeing people react to this moment in time and what's happening in our country, but also in our state.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that, it's we're 1 year into a new presidential administration, and for those of us who other advocates, activists who, were really kind of holding our breath to see, knowing how tough things were going to become for communities of color in general, and particularly BIPOC communities, as well as other marginalizing communities. I don't want to ever leave out our queer siblings, our LGBTQIA plus siblings, as well as our disability siblings. Like just recognizing that, with this new administration, that the climate in our both politically and socially was going to get a lot more hostile to our communities. And so, we're a year in, and unfortunately, as predicted, things have gotten a lot worse, right? Not only at the federal level, but also at the state level, as we've seen like increased attacks on these communities. We've seen increased enforcement, even here in New Hampshire, which for some people may assume is a pretty sleepy state when it comes to sort of some of the really overt raids and really high profile rallies and incidences and clashes between activists and federal law enforcement in other like larger metropolitan areas. But, ICE raids are happening here. We've seen deportation and detention efforts really increase exponentially. And we've seen the impact of that on community members in terms of how people move and exist in the state. So, knowing that people are afraid to even leave their homes, to go to work, knowing
Right.
that at any point in time they could get picked up. They could be picked up, they could be separated from their families, they could be taken out of state to a detention center where it's incredibly difficult to find people, as more and more the system, our immigration system in particular, really focuses primarily on enforcement and not so much at all on creating pathways of relief or even adjudicating or moving along like what has been years and years of backlogged cases. And so we're really seeing that emphasis on punishment, that emphasis on separation, really that increased state violence. And of course, we're seeing it as well. I don't want to speak out of turn, but just recognizing what our queer communities are going through as well, with having to even just fight for the right to be able to access the bathrooms that they need to, being able to be recognized as full human beings by the very lawmakers who are supposed to represent them, as well as their other members of their constituencies. And so it's really has become a real climate of increased fear, trepidation, and real vulnerability. But at the same time, I don't want to de-emphasize the real upswell of commitment and support and resistance that has come up through our communities, because people are seeing what's going on. And unfortunately, sometimes it does take for a lot of folks, especially if you have more privileged identities, to recognize that actually, like this is really bad. What's happening, like as it becomes
Right.
more and more overt, as you see, as it comes closer to you, right? As you see maybe your loved one or your neighbor or your colleague gets swept up in either detention to deportation machine or get targeted because of their queer identity, you start to recognize that, oh, actually, this isn't something that's abstract and outside of myself, right? This is actually something that comes really close to home. And the reality of that really sitting with people and people showing up, showing up
Hmm.
imperfectly, showing up messy, showing up without having every tool in the toolbox, but still willing to show up, honestly has given me a lot of hope. Because if there's one thing that we in New Hampshire, like all of us granite staters, like we can agree on is the importance of community, right? We may not
Yeah,
agree on who gets
absolutely, Grace.
included in
Yeah,
that community, right? But for
absolutely.
those of us who recognize the expansiveness of that term, we know that like if we are to protect our communities, it's going to be up to us, not up
Right.
to anyone else.
Right. And you're right on. New Hampshire is such a person to person state. It's why I love living here. It's why I love raising my family here. Working with wonderful people like you and seeing you out in the community. I want to hit on a couple points that you said that are really important to me. So, we have $170 billion of our tax money that has gone into funding ICE specifically. And I want to clarify, ICE is part of the Department of Homeland and Security, right? It's part of DHS. It is not all of DHS, right? And so, to your point, I keep thinking, what could we do with $170 billion put into supporting the backlog of, what's happening in the immigration court system, putting people in place to work with immigrants coming in at the border to make sure that the process is smoother, make sure things are documented better and more appropriately, make sure that things are streamlined into real immigration reform that actually makes sense, that actually has an impact, versus, to your point, this enforcement that isn't actually true to the justice of what we are founded on, that isn't true to the Constitution that we are founded on in terms of due process and individual rights for anybody here on our soil, right? That's not just applied to citizens. It's anyone here in our country. This is the foundation of the rights that we believe and that are important to us. And so I keep thinking about, I'm someone who's always looking at intention and impact, right? And we've heard a lot from people about their concern of immigration enforcement, quote unquote, illegal. We understand that term is not necessarily accurate, right? And that, extended time here as an immigrant is not a criminal violation, right? And so we need to actually deal with this appropriately. And what we're seeing is that there has been a huge influx of funds for an armed force that is not actually helping us with an immigration process. That's not actually helping us get to reform. That's not actually helping us get to safer communities. That's not helping us with the overload and the backlog that's very real in the immigration court system, right, Grace?
Yeah,
And
no, absolutely. I mean, if that was actually the case, if it really was about ensuring that we have an orderly and humane immigration system, we would have been investing in hiring additional immigration judges instead of firing. What we've
right,
seen from the federal government, what we've seen from this current administration is a real targeting campaign to remove, especially judges, immigration judges who have a track record of actually giving fair rulings when it comes to people's cases, rather than judges who are more willing to simply sort of rubber stamp deportation order, regardless of
right,
the merits of any person's case. And so, and we certainly, I think it's also really important to recognize as well that the immigration system, in terms of policy, the laws and the policies that govern, what are the types of cases, what are the categories of immigrants, a lot of that power actually it lies with Congress. Congress is the one that has the power to decide immigration law, but because there has been a systemic sort of relinquishing of the authority and the responsibility and the duty on behalf of the American people for Congress to do their job, very basically, to create laws and pathways, to accept the laws that have been offered, from the DREAM Act, which would have allowed a pathway to citizenship for young people who came into the
Right.
country as children, either, with a visa or were an overstay of that visa, and at whatever point in their childhood became undocumented. When that failed in Congress, whether it's a bill like the registry bill, which would change a law that hasn't been touched since, oh God, I can't even, maybe the 1970s.
I was going to
I'll
say
have a
decades. It's decades, Grace.
decades,
And
right?
that's the
So that,
issue, right? We
Right.
we
But see,
have
what I'm
actually
hearing is you guys are speaking about this, but I heard nothing during the election about that
well, so
other
here's
option.
so
You go
here's
ahead.
the
right.
thing. So here's the thing, Neil, and I've spoken about this a little bit because right before the last election, we actually had an immigration reform bill introduced on the table in Congress. And it was not perfect for sure. It definitely needed some markups and some adjustments. I don't know that I would have been a proponent as it was introduced, but it was not put on the floor for a vote because our current president pushed through Speaker Johnson to not do that because he wanted it as a campaign tool. So I think for me, what is so frustrating for me is that this has now become party politics when this is actually about humans and human life. And this should not be a partisan issue. This should be a bipartisan issue to make sure that we have reform for secure borders, for a real immigration process that is just and fair and based on, human needs and rights and our Constitution, and that we actually have the funds to do this. We have $170 billion going to paramilitary. Like we can take that funds and put it into actual reform, into the immigration courts, into better systems to put in place because ultimately this is about humans. Grace, you're an immigrant in our state, in our country, and you give such incredible life to our communities. You're such a wonderful member of our state, and I'm so grateful you're here. And I'm second generation. My grandmother is an immigrant and came here when she was a young lady to MIT. It was a handful of women at MIT, and I think about this so much because, our nation is built on truly having all of these different cultures, all of these different perspectives, all of these different people that feed into the creativity, the development, and the progress of our nation. It is what builds us. So Neil, yeah, go ahead.
I know. I mean, just mentioning these things, but this is where the differentiation can come, where candidates can come out of the woodwork, not just with the same talking points, but something that's really important: our education system, our healthcare, and also immigration in the correct way. A good path to citizenship, if they're going to be a great member of society, we should make it easier so that then we wouldn't have other people having to try to enter the country illegally. They would know a way of doing it. The
Right.
more people we have to pay taxes, the more people that we have that can work and provide a living for their families, the better our economy will be. That's the missing point. But there's
Yeah.
always somebody in the middle, or not in the middle, the middle that all wants this change, that sees that they can't get along. And we've had this for how many years? The divisiveness, 16 plus years or
Right.
more,
Right. I mean, it's been 30
where
years in the
Well,
making, right,
I
Neil?
mean, I would argue this is longer than 16 years, right? I think
Right.
it's always important for us to really root in the fact. I mean, this country was founded was a colonial project. It was founded on the genocide of the native peoples that were here. It was founded on the blood and the backs and the lives of Africans who were taken and enslaved. It was founded on the many, many different groups of immigrants that have made their way to our shores, whether it was through Ellis Island or it was through the northern border, through the southern border, East Coast or West Coast, to try to make a life here. And the reality is that as our world has changed, right, the reasons for people to immigrate have changed. And the reality is that it is often because of what the role that the United States, our own country, takes and on the global stage that creates the conditions, especially now in modern times, more so in modern times, that has forced people to come here. Because outside of the United States, where our country is seen as a beacon of freedom, it's seen as a beacon of liberty, it's seen as a safe place where people go. And I have talked to so many people who have entered our country seeking safety, seeking asylum, seeking refuge, even seeking opportunity, with the idea that once they reach our shores, that they would be met with care. They would be met with the fulfillment of those promises that are marketed, honestly, to the
Right.
rest of the world. And the reality is far, far different, right? So I think it is always important for us to remember that, this our history, our like the injustice of our systems didn't just start in the last like couple of decades. It's gotten significantly worse, right? And I think what's important, I really want to kind of latch onto something that both of you have said about. One of it is the importance of having secure borders. And the
Right.
reality is that security, I think it's so important for us to really expand our understanding and definition of security, right? There is this right now, part of what makes the campaign against immigrants so successful is that immigrants are scapegoated for all of the social ills of our country. People can't afford their housing, their wages have stagnated. I mean, New Hampshire still has a 7.25 minimum wage.
Right.
While our neighboring states have at least 10, if not 15, if not 17, right? So
17. Yeah.
we are so far behind, right? We have people who are struggling now to be able to access affordable healthcare, let alone healthcare that fully covers all of the needs that they have, right? Because I mean, I would argue like being a human being and alive is a pre-existing condition, right? Like, show me one human being who doesn't have some sort of health issue that's going to need some care. I mean,
I agree
it's
with
not
you, Grace. Yeah.
reasonable.
Yeah.
So there's all of these other ways that we build security within our country. But when we are not actually holding the ones in our society, within our political systems, within our structures of power, accountable to the fact that people can't afford to even live where they work, they can't afford to drive a car, they can't afford public transportation if there is even any, they can't afford groceries, they can't afford their basic needs to be met. And instead of actually solving that issue in a country that is the wealthiest country in the world, wealthiest in human history, some would argue, it is absolutely, I mean, it's mind-bogglingly hypocritical that the reason then that we are being shown and told as the problems, the root of the problems for that are people who are coming here seeking safety and security. Because even the argument that, oh, the only people that are being picked up are those with a criminal record. I mean, personally, as a student of
That's no way,
abolition,
no
it's
way.
not
Right.
that's not
Right.
the
I think
case,
we can
right?
all
And it
agree
doesn't
that
even
this is
matter.
not the case, right?
That's
We're
not the
seeing
case. The
this.
majority of people are not being held that are being held even have a criminal record, right?
Right.
And the
Right.
majority of people, the people that even had they had some sort of relief, they had some sort of status, that status is being taken away to force them into the category of quote unquote criminals that are then it's then justified an excuse to pick them up. So
But it's not
there's
even
much
criminal, right,
more.
Grace? Like, let's break it
No,
down. Like, even if they're extending their stay, it is not actually a legal criminal violation, right?
It's an
Correct me if
extent.
I'm
it is
wrong,
not. It is
right?
not. And I think we also
Right.
need to recognize the racial injustice of it as well, because who does tend to get criminalized, right? Who does tend to get labeled as a criminal? It tends to be Black and brown people of color, right? So even who is sort of considered what is considered criminal, there are people who are picked up who had traffic violations, who
Right.
had very low, like misdemeanor level drug offenses, the kinds of things that we in other spaces have recognized are injustices of our criminal legal system. They're recognizing that there's an over criminalization of certain communities, there's an over reliance on criminalization and punishment in order to solve some of these big issues in our community, which in some cases, for instance, when it comes to drug charges, drug offenses, we recognize in some spaces that it's actually a health issue, right? It's a substance misuse disorder. It's
Right.
not a moral failing of the individual. It's a recognition that it is an illness that needs to be treated and be treated as a public health issue. And so when
Absolutely.
we're not able to sort of make that switch, then it becomes about securing our borders. It becomes a really a fear-based policy decision making that isn't actually rooted in what people truly need. Because yes, absolutely, immigrants contribute billions of dollars, millions of dollars into our taxes, right? Even as we do not receive, they do not receive those benefits in return. And so it is important to recognize, but it goes beyond simply the financial impact, right? Immigrants, I always tell people, immigrants are not this sort of weird, sideline bubble enclave that live in the middle or on the fringes of our state. They're the people that we go to work with. They're the people that we go to school with. They're the people
Yeah.
that we sleep next to. They're the people that we break bread with. The people that we pray next to. They are our loved ones. They are directly tied to us. And so what hurts them hurts us.
Thank you, Grace. And to that point, I'd love for us to talk for a minute, because we've kind of gotten into it all, right? Talk a little bit about that hope that we're feeling, the way that the community is coming together. And I think something that I'm inspired by is that I've had people across the political spectrum reach out to me and support me, in my statements about what's happened, and my concerns about ICE as its entity, and being able to fund the Department of Homeland Security better and differently, and more effectively and efficiently with a humanitarian lens. But I'd love to talk about what you're seeing and feeling and hearing on the ground in New Hampshire, because you've been at a lot of events over the last week and you've been hearing from people. And what are people saying? What are you feeling from people right now?
Yeah, yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm feeling a mix of things, right? And it depends on the person that I'm asking. I think recognizing, having the privilege of being able to be both an American citizen as well as an immigrant, having grown up here in the Granite State. So this is my home state. So when people are like, "Oh, go back home," I'm like, "Which home? This
You're
home
like, I
here
am
in
home. This is
Australia
home.
here,
I'm home.
right? This home." Or
Yeah.
yes, I have another home. I have a homeland. Congo will always be my homeland. It is my ancestral
It's your
seat. But
heartland, right? It's your heartland.
it's my homeland and my heartland, and
Yeah.
so is right here in the Granite State. And so it depends on who I'm talking to. And so our allies, other citizens who are allies, who are whether they're white or from black or brown, who are in this work, recognizing that they're feeling galvanized. People are feeling. I mean, people
Mm.
are. I think some people are very shocked. They're very shocked at what's happening. They're very shocked at the overtness of it. They're saddened. They're heartbroken. They're scared. But the fear doesn't outweigh the willingness to show up and do something. Again, regardless of how long they've been in the movement, how long they've been working towards immigration justice, or whether they've been doing it forever, they're just coming into it. So people are really galvanized. They want to help, and as an advocate and as an immigrant, sometimes we want to direct that energy into the right ways, right? Because advocacy, activism, it looks different. And sometimes people think that it's only about showing up to rallies. It's only about, reaching out to my legislator. It's like, it's that and more, right? There's
Right.
so many different roles that we can take in movement work. We need caregivers, we need writers, we need artists, we need speakers, we need podcasters, we need people who are running for office. We need people who are, running businesses. We need people who are caring for our elderly loved ones and our children. Like, we need all of us in the movement. We all have gifts that can contribute. And so people have this energy, and they're looking for places to contribute and to give those skills and those gifts in a form, in a way that will actually be helpful to people. And so also then recognizing that there's multiple ways to show up. And so when we also have community members who are in much more vulnerable positions than I am, and I have the express privilege now, after being in this country since I was 2 years old, now being a U.S. citizen for not even 5 years. I think we're going on 5 years this year. It'll
Wow.
be my fifth year
Oh,
That's
I can't.
great.
I will
Right?
celebrate that with you, Grace.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I'm celebrating it. I mean, I never thought that day would come, but it did. And it gives me, gives me more of an ability to be able to advocate on behalf of my community members who do not have the protections of citizenship in this country, who are much more vulnerable. And there is this, I think, this deep appreciation and gratitude that people are willing to show up. And sometimes, again, whether that's showing up to the rallies or showing up as a direct support to an immigrant community member or a family who is in need of either legal support or a ride to be able to go to work and school, so that they can keep on keeping on, even as they try to figure out their cases, recognizing that immigrants are just people, right? So the same concerns that even as everyday citizens would have about housing, about school, about work, about whatever. Folks have that same immigrant, our immigrant loved ones have those same concerns as well. But they also have then the additional complexity of having vulnerable immigration cases. And so
Right.
when people are showing up for individuals and families to give that direct support, that direct accompaniment, I mean, there is so much love. It strengthens our connections to each other. So what I've been seeing really as people are bringing in different energies, they're bringing in different concerns, a sense in the sense of like, what can we do? How can we help? How can I find help? Where can I find help? There is this energy to really strengthen the bonds between folks, to recognize that again, we really are stronger together. And there's
Yes.
all different ways that we can contribute and support and help each other.
Yep.
And sometimes it takes, it takes that we are so relational, right? It takes that one-to-one conversation. It takes that, oh, I know this person, and let me act as a bridge to connect you two together so that you have this and they're offering this. And it's also being out there and being very publicly explicit and unapologetic about the fact that what's happening is wrong. We're not going to be gaslit into claiming that it is anything other than what it is, which is racial violence. It is an immoral injustice. It is oppression tactics and techniques updated and refined for the 21st century. Like, let us not pretend that this isn't exactly what it is. What it does is that it still has created the conditions that yes, there is fear, yes, there is concern, yes, there is real problems, but there's also a real desire and need for people to come closer together, to connect more strongly, to learn together, to root themselves in both in what has already been happening, but also to allow the upswell of new creative strategies and tactics to use the old, refine it for the new, so that we can win, because we will win. It
I
may not
love that,
happen
Grace.
today, it may not happen tomorrow, but it will happen because evil doesn't get to outlive good. It just doesn't.
Yeah, and I think, we're definitely coming to the end of our time here. I feel like we could talk for another 2, 3, 4 hours, a few days, a week, a month about this, and we will. But something that has hit home for me, my half my family was killed in World War II, and my grandmother was forced to dig her own grave under Nazi order, and so that's always been part of my story, my history. And I never thought anything of it. It was just there. It was just part of it, right? And so when I think about what we're seeing right now, it's incredibly alarming to me. I very much at some point, want to have a further conversation with you about local law enforcement and healing our relationships in our communities with local law enforcement, because I really stand with them, and that they're being asked to break their oath to the Constitution, which is the fundamental basis of our country, and they are people that serve our local communities, right? And so when I'm looking at what's happening on the federal level and seeing that, you know, history has a tendency to rhyme, right? And we have
Mhm.
the opportunity right now to flip the script, and we can do
Absolutely.
this. And I think, to your point, something that has been in my heart for a long time is both, the First Lady of Ukraine, Olena Zelenska, as well as Nobel Peace Prize laureate Oleksandr Matvichuk, have both said in my presence, now is a time for ordinary people to do extraordinary things. And Grace, I heard you
Absolutely.
say so many times that everybody has something to offer, right? It doesn't mean people are
Absolutely.
comfortable getting up and speaking in front of a crowd like you and I have done. It doesn't mean they're comfortable getting on a podcast and putting their words out there, but there are so many ways people can get involved. So, to kind of wrap us up, if people want to get in touch with you, Grace, how do they get in touch with you to get involved here on the ground in New Hampshire?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's such a great question. And I 100% agree. I mean, the first thing I would say is please, 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 if you haven't already, please sign up for a State House Watch newsletter that is written and published by American Friends Service Committee, New Hampshire program. You can go to afsc.org/NH. The sign up if you want to receive the newsletter in your inbox on a weekly basis from January to June is on there, but you can also read the newsletter online, and it has all of the information that you could possibly want and more about not only what's going on at the state level, but also federally, action alerts, news, updates, events. I highly recommend. I have such deep love for the New Hampshire program as a former employee,
Yeah.
but also in recognizing that it's such a useful tool for our legislators, for regular folks to just really keep a beat on what's happening at the state, especially during the legislative cycle, which goes again from January to June. I also really welcome people to follow New Hampshire Center for Justice and Equity on our Facebook as well as our Instagram pages. We publish data briefs. We uplift events, actions, ways for people to get involved. And so if folks are looking for places to plug in, please, follow us there. And I would also highly recommend too, join and again, social media. We love Facebook in New Hampshire for whatever reason. It's popular as heck here. But if people want to get involved in New Hampshire 5051 as well, another great group, local people doing amazing things in a variety of ways. So please, folks are on Facebook as well as on Discord. So you can just look up New Hampshire 5051, New Hampshire Center for Justice and Equity, as well as American Friends Service Committee has just 3 organizations that you can really tap into, plug into, so that you know when and where and how you can show up for our communities.
Thank you so much, Grace. Neil, did you want to chime in with anything else?
No,
before we
not at
wrap
all.
up?
Just kind of closing out. I mean, what's great is we're having dialogue and we're having a good conversation dialogue for the human people, for our citizens, for human being, human rights, education, healthcare, and this issue. Biggest mistakes that are happening is we're hurting too many people right now. Instead of coming together as parties and working together in Congress. That's it, period. That's what needs to be done, especially with the healthcare increases. Crazy. Go on the healthcare.gov right now and see the pricing. It's unreal for the average American citizen to purchase healthcare.
Yep,
Terrible.
and that impacts all of us every single day. We have a family of 5, so it's very close to my heart. 3 children to make sure that they get the healthcare access they can get. So, Grace, thank you so much for being on with us, and Neil for co-hosting today. We look forward to talking to you again, Grace, and seeing you out on the trail. This is Sarah Chizinski, and this is Talk to Me with Sarah C. If you'd like to reach us, you can email us at talktome@sarahc603.com. That's talk to me, Sarah, with an H, C603.com. Back to you, Neil.
All right. And that was a special simulcast of Talk to Me with Sarah C.